Hey, how's it going? Today we are going to talk about how to play the Regidrago deck. Now it's not going to be a gameplay video. I'm going to go into like sequencing, prize mapping, some examples of how to play out certain hands, and I'm going to go pretty in depth into matchups because this is a deck that mostly is matchup based. Like you have to take different lines and different matchups and stuff like that. The sequencing is pretty straightforward with the deck for the most part. There's a couple little things I'm going to touch on. Yeah, let's get into it. Real quick, I just wanted to thank everyone that subscribed and everyone that watches the videos for getting me to 500 subs. That is really cool. Back to the video. Alright, so Regidrago is a 280 hit point V-Star Pokemon with an attack for Grass Fire that lets us copy the attack of any Dragon Pokemon in our discard pile. It also has a V-Star ability called Legacy Star, and it lets you discard the top 7 cards of your deck and take 2 cards from your discard pile. That can be 2 cards you discarded with it or 2 cards that were already in there. It doesn't really matter. This is what makes this deck work so well. Being able to copy attacks is really good, but being able to reuse resources like Prime Catcher or just setting up like a board where you have 2 V-Stars at the end of the game and you still haven't used your V-Star ability, you can kind of set up checkmate scenarios where you're like, I'm going to get any 2 cards out of my discard pile and I'm going to win the game no matter what. And the way that we're going to set up Regidrago is of course Teal Mask Ogerpon with its ability that lets us attach a grass from hand to it. We get to draw a card. This lets us draw extra cards. We can get extra energy into play, and then we're going to use the Energy Switch item to move the grass over to our Regidragos. Now we could also play the supporter card called Poppy that lets us move 2 energy from one of our Pokemon to another, but typically like a rule of thumb is whenever you can do what a supporter does with an item, it's better off to play the item. So we have a whole slew of attackers and attacking options. That's really probably the most fun part of this deck, is being able to use any number of attacks. You can also like be a little bit creative with what attackers you want to use. Unfortunately, we don't have the most amount of good dragon attackers right now, but there's still a pretty wide variety. So first we have our one-shot attackers. There's 2 choices for this: Raging Bolt or Giratina VSTAR. Could also use the Dragon Kyurem, but then you do 60 to yourself, and that is generally pretty bad. We want to rely on our 280 hit points and not bring it back down to 220, which becomes a really easy number to hit. And the Kyurem, along with the Raging Bolt, are also basic Pokemon, so that increases the odds that we're going to start it and we're not going to get to use it. And if it's one of our main attacking options, we'll have to play a Turo or start adding a lot more basic Pokemon to our deck to decrease the odds that we start it. That's why I personally think Giratina VSTAR is probably the way to go. You do 280 damage with it, have to loss zone 2 energy, but we can either loss zone them off the active if we think it's going to get knocked out, or we can loss zone energy off our Ogerpon or any of our bench Pokemon, so it's pretty flexible. We can also set up damage with Dragapult's Phantom Dive to make it so that Lost Impact KOs whatever we want. Dragapult's going to be the main attacker with this deck. It's why we play 2 copies. Does 200 to the active, and we put 6 damage counters on the bench however we want. This is where a lot of the skill expression comes in with this deck, is knowing where to put the damage and planning ahead, because this combines really well with, like I said, Lost Impact or even this Kyurem, which is the only basic attacker I think we should be playing in the deck. The Kyurem says discard all the energy off this Pokemon, and it does 110 damage to 3 Pokemon. This is extremely powerful. This was Articuno Zapdos Moltres Tag Team GX's GX attack, so that just shows like the power creep, how insane this attack actually is. The Articuno Zapdos Moltres also shuffled itself into the deck, so it was like a heal, but the extra effect was the 110 to 3 Pokemon, which is just insane. We can take 6 prizes in 1 turn with 2 of these attacks, or we can like take a knockout and set up a Squawkabilly or something so that no matter what, we're able to take like 2 prizes minimum on the next turn. It's just so broken. Another option is goodra VSTAR. It does 200 damage and reduces the damage taken next turn by 80. This is a pretty good attacker. Not everyone was playing it though. It's like really good in the mirror. It can be good against decks like Iron Thorns, and it's also pretty good against Gardevoir. A lot of decks seem to be playing the Goodra, but the ones that didn't played the Iron Leaves. The Iron Leaves is pretty cool. It's like a switch and an energy switch kind of deal all in one. You can just use it to get your Drago out of the active, or you can use it as an attacker to KO a Charizard or a bench support Pokemon like Squawkabilly, Mew, or Lumineon. Another option is the Haxorus. I do think this is the next best option. It was only played in one of the competitive Drago list that made day 2 at Worlds. It does 230 and discards the top 3 cards of your deck, which is kind of unfortunate because we're already burning through resources really quickly, but being able to hit 230 like over and over without having to lose impact would be a really nice thing to have in a Regidrago deck. And the first attack just KOs a Pokemon with special energy on it. This can be really good into Lugia as long as they're not playing too many mist energies, and with the rise of Roaring Moon, I imagine they're going to up the mist energy count. Noivern EX is another option. Its first attack says you can't be damaged by basic Pokemon. It does 70. The second attack does 140 and stops your opponent from playing special energies in stadiums. This could get better if we could figure out a way to get a lone Drago V-Star in play. Then Noivern would just be Miraidon and Raging Bolt. It would not be Roaring Moon because the Frenzy Gouging would just go through it. But for the most part, it shouldn't be very effective because your opponent should never KO your last bench Pokemon, and with only doing 70 damage, they should have enough time to save up resources in their hand to do like a Prime Catcher boss play or a Iron Bundle into boss play. And if we just like keep setting up our bench normally, because we know this is going to happen eventually, then they're just going to be able to take all 6 prizes on bench Pokemon like they want to do anyway. Hawlucha is another option. It does 10 damage to 2 bench Pokemon. We can use this to knock out bench Ralts or Charmanders with Phantom Dive, and it can also be combined with like a boss to ping a Teal Mask Ogerpon or Fezandipiti and then boss it up into the active and hit it for 200 with Phantom Dive or Goodra's attack. Razwolp and Bradner both played Cleffa in their Drago list at Worlds. Cleffa just has a free attack that lets us draw up to 7 cards in our hand. It also has free retreat, so it's a great pivot that doesn't force us to have a 2-prizer in play like Mew EX, and it can just also be useful to switch into going first to not have to keep one of our Dragos or Ogerpon in the active. Before Worlds, a lot of Drago lists had a way to remove a Pokemon from play or pick a Pokemon up in Turo or Thornton, and then Clap Stadium is a non-supporter based way to do that. But at Worlds, a lot of people cut those cards and had great success with it, so we're just kind of like hedging our bets against not starting the one basic attacker we play in Kyurem. There's also options for recovery cards. The best performing Regidrago Worlds played 2 superior energy retrievals and 1 Night Stretcher. Ian Robb, who made top cut and technically won in top 8, played 1 Super Rod, 1 Superior, and 1 Night Stretcher, and then people like Isaiah Bradner just played 2 Super Rod. So it really seems like we could run any combination of recovery cards as long as we have at least 2 of them, and at least one way to get multiple energy back. Now on to sequencing. The sequencing with this deck is overall pretty simple and straightforward. A lot of the hands kind of play themselves out, but sequencing is of course playing cards in a certain order to make it the most likely that we achieve a desired outcome or draw a certain type of card. So it's always just best to remember to think about what you're trying to do with the hand that we have, what the goal is, and play the cards in the order that makes it most likely that we achieve that goal. Whether it be drawing a supporter, then we would play all the vessels first and Ultra Balls and Nest Balls before using like a Teal Mask ability, or if we want to draw more Pokemon, then we'd hold the Nest Balls and Ultra Balls. Some typical rules is, like with every deck, we want to save our energy attachment for as late during the turn as possible, but with this we also want to try and save energy switches for the end of the turn, and usually like the V-Star ability will be the last thing that we do before attacking for that turn, other than playing the cards that we get off of the V-Star. But of course we're going to play the energy switches before researching. You don't research them away, but if we have a hand that we're keeping, we should really do all of our actions and then energy switch all the energy over and attach at the end of the turn, just in case some better option comes up. Or if we end up whiffing the attack, maybe we want to hold the energy switches, or if we can't attack with a Drago V-Star, then we're going to be happy we didn't already attach fire energy to it, then we can attach a grass to Ogerpon and attack with that. Things like that do come up quite often. Also, there's a lot of times with this deck we want to play Ultra Ball before Vessel, because we want to grab an attacker and vessel it away, or just hold one of those options in our hand to hopefully draw an attacking option off of a Teal Dance, then we can still discard it. So say that we have a hand like this and we know that we're playing a mirror match. How would you play this out? Well, first I Nest Ball for a Teal Mask because I know that I want to get a Teal Mask down, and I Nest Ball for a second Drago because it is always nice to get 2 Drago Vs down, and I hold on to the Ultra Ball because while I would really like to draw a fire energy or a vessel off of this Teal Dance here, I do want to keep the option of 1 being able to discard an attacking threat, or 2 being able to get Squawkabilly and ditching this hand to further develop the board state. In a mirror match, whoever goes first is heavily advantaged because they can get the first attack off. So I want to make sure that I'm definitely able to attack. And then after the squawk, I choose to just attach the grass energy here because next turn, Ultra Balling away the superior and whatever we top deck for a Dragapult EX or something like that, and then vesseling that away is a great option. Now, unfortunately, we do end up top decking Radiant Charizard, but that just has to go. And now can Ultra Ball away Zard and superior for Dragapult EX, vessel that away, and then have a fire and use Teal Dance and have pretty good odds to draw an energy switch off of the research. Now, unfortunately, I do draw a switch off of the Teal Dance, but at this point in the match, they didn't even get a Drago V down. Just getting an attack off is going to put us in an extremely good spot to win the game. Would have also liked to get down another Ogerpon and get another energy going on that, but this hand will do just fine. This is a pretty typical starting hand for Drago, and just the correct way to play this hand out would be first vessel away the Dragapult, grab grass and fire, use Teal Dance, see what you draw, attach the fire to the Drago V, and whether to play the energy switch or not really is dependent on the matchup. If we're up against a really aggressive deck that could knock something out, I would hold the energy switch to see what they choose to knock out, and then we can play out our hand based on what happens next turn. But if we're up against like Charizard or Gardevoir going first, I would play out the energy switch because they're more likely to Iono us, and there's no way that they could knock out either of our Pokemon. This is an example of a hand where we would really like to draw Pokemon and energy, but what I would do is just use Teal Dance right away, see what we draw, and then Ultra Ball away probably one of the V-Stars in a Canceling Cologne or the top deck, depending on what the top deck is and what the matchup is. And we're gonna have to check the prizes pretty well to see what we have for Pokemon recovery and check how many of our V-Stars are in the deck and base the next move off of that. Like if we're up against a fast aggressive deck like Miraidon and we have our other V-Star and a Super Rod or Stretcher in the deck, then we're going to have to grab Squawkabilly and draw more cards to get a little more set up. This is a pretty unfortunate hand, but it's just an example of a hand with Ultra Ball and Vessel. I just kind of randomize hands on Limitless Tabletops and then pick ones that I think give a good example, but unfortunately with this hand, we either have to Ultra Ball away, double Iono, or Iono research, grab an attacker and vessel it away, just guaranteeing that we get an attacker into our discard pile, and grab Fire Grass off the vessel, use Teal Dance to draw, and then attach the fire to one of the Dragos. And I find that this is like the bare minimum that we want to accomplish on our first turn going first. But like I said earlier, the sequencing with this deck is pretty simple. I try to get usually Dragapult EX into the discard pile early game, and then most of the hands will kind of play out themselves, just thinning cards out with like Vessel and Ultra Ball when necessary. This is kind of the opposite of decks like Raging Bull and Chiampao, where a lot of the skill comes down to sequencing out hands. More of the skill expression with Drago is knowing what attacks to use, knowing when to use them, being able to hold the V-Star, recognizing when we can settle for a different attack or a different option without like burning the V-Star early or wasting extra resources, and knowing what the plan is for certain matchups and how to prize map and adjust the plan on the fly and things like that. Prize mapping with Drago is very important. Prize mapping is figuring out what Pokemon we're going to knock out to take our 6 prizes and how we're going to do it. So usually after both players are set up, we're going to want to look at the board and figure out how we're going to take our prize cards. All of the best players do this every game. Like specifically with Isaiah Bradner, you can kind of see him do it when he's on stream. He's either counting on his fingers or pointing back and forth from each player, trying to count the turns and figure out if he has enough time to do the attacks that he's planning to do before his opponent can do the attacks that they have to do to take their prizes. This kind of inevitably will make you better at resource management, because that's really what resource management is recognizing what you need to take all 6 prize cards. So by figuring out prize mapping, then you can know what resources you need, and then you can know what resources you can afford to get rid of. It's also important to consider what the most efficient way to take the prizes are. because that's going to lower the chances that we whiff a planned turn. That's why I think Radiant Charizard is the best Radiant Pokemon in the deck. It's a quick, easy way to take 2 prizes without having to get 3 energy on one of your Pokemon, but recognizing when that is the way we're going to take the last 2, or if we can take 2 prizes with Ogerpon, or if we even need to set up 2 Dragos to attack, are all important things to consider. And taking all that into account is how you're going to know what exactly to get off of the V-Star ability every game. I think most of the time before using it, there should be 2 specific cards that are needed anyway, but there are the times when either we mill too many resources and we have to consider if it is even possible to win the game without getting some of them back, or there's like the rare occasion when we just need 1 card and we have to decide what the second card is going to be. Prize mapping can also help you recognize how fast your opponent is going to win the game. It can let you know what turns you're just able to kind of take off and pass, or recognize the situations where it's like, oh, if I don't attack this turn, there's no possible way I can win. And knowing that kind of stuff and recognizing those situations is pretty important with Regidrago, because I don't think I've lost a single game where I've been able to hold the V-Star ability until the end. Now on to matchups. I will be putting the name of the deck at the top of the screen, with a plus if the matchup is favored for Drago, a minus if it's unfavored, and plus minus if it's like 50-50. My favorite part about playing Drago is having a good Charizard matchup. I do find that saving the V-Star till the end of the game in this match can be very important. It can set up checkmate almost every game because knocking out a Charizard is so easy with just Ogerpon. Phantom Dive, Ogerpon, and Radiant Zard are going to be the attacks we most often use in this matchup. We're going to want to go first and get off a turn 2 Phantom Dive, targeting down whatever is in the active and knocking out the Pidgey on the bench with the ping damage. I usually kind of make my prize map around trying to keep knocking out the Pidgey every time they put it in play. I also try to stay on even prizes in this matchup. I'll only really take the 3 prize turn on like Rotom and knocking out Pidgey or Duskull off the bench if I can save my V-Star until the end of the game. Also, I find that most games that I win, I do not knock out their Charizard until it's my last 2 prizes. There's also a lot of games against Zard where you don't even ever need to set up 2 Dragos to attack. Often I'll just set up 1 to attack and have the other one on the bench as a way to use the V-Star at the end of the game when they Iono to 2. I'll just use like 1 Regidrago attack, 1 Ogerpon attack, and 1 Radiant Zard attack, but that does depend on them having to put down Lumineon or Fezandipiti, which they often do have to do if they are unable to get a Pidgeot out. Iron Thorns is a favored matchup. We're going to want to set up with our Squawkabilly using Motivate to put energy on our Pokemon, or if we draw into Canceling Cologne early, we can use that, or just kind of save up our hand to use that in Teal Dance, get all of our energy in play, use Drago's V-Star, get the Cologne back so we have options to draw later, set up another Drago if we need to, but we shouldn't need to set up another Drago, especially if we're playing Goodra. If we are playing the Goodra, what we can do is use the first attack as the Goodra V-Star attack, do 200. Next turn, use Phantom Dive to put another 200 on the active, knock out the one that we just did 200 to on the bench, and put 30 on the other Iron Thorns that they'll have in play. And then the turn after that, we can win the game with a 4 prize turn with another Phantom Dive attack, essentially winning before they even knocked out one of our Regidragos. And if we can get 2 Dragos set up, we can just Phantom Dive the whole time and win, like Phantom Dive twice and then use Lost Impact. It's a really favored matchup in my opinion. Miraidon is a hard matchup because they're typically going to win in 3 turns by KOing all of our low HP 2 prize Pokemon, and it is really hard for us to not bench at least 3 in combination of Regidrago V and Ogerpon. Most games we're going to have to put a Squawkabilly down in this matchup because we do still want to go first, I believe, to get down a couple Ogerpon and at least 2 Regidrago Vs to avoid them knocking out our lone V. And we also want to try and get a 1 prize Pokemon into the active spot going first, just to assure that if they're going to take 2 prizes, they at least have to set up Iron Hands, which is going to be the most difficult attacker for them to set up. If they miss taking 2 prizes on their first turn going second, we can just prize race them by winning with 2 Phantom Dive attacks and a Lost Impact. The only other way for us to just prize race them is to use 2 Kyurem attacks to take 6 prizes. We should only do that if it is our only option to win, or if we're able to save like our V-Star or something to guarantee another attack next turn. But most of the time we are going to have to try and fix the prize trade at the end of the game with Iono plus attacking with Radiant Charizard. if they have multiple attackers set up, or it seems like they can very easily get another attacker set up. I'll try and knock out their Fezandipiti with my Charizard, but if not, I just knock out the active. Raging Bull is going to be another unfavored matchup. As you can see, these aggressive decks that can take 2 prizes in the first turn are generally unfavored. This is very similar to Miraidon. We want a 1 prize Pokemon in the active spot and on the bench going first. I think that this deck wants to go first against almost everything because we're not going to take a knockout going second. I don't think that we're really buying any time by going second or taking anything away from these other decks. So yeah, similar to Miraidon, we want to look out for 4 prize turns, kind of target down energy with Phantom Dive, and we can also try to slip a goodra attack in there if we Iono them low. They might whiff a knockout. Keep an eye out for the 6 prize turn with 2 Kyurem attacks. But a lot of the time we're going to be trying to make up the prize trade with Radiant Charizard. They go down to 2, we Iono them to 2, attack with Radzard, try and do it 2 turns in a row, or go Radzard into Lost Impact. Alright, Roaring Moon. I think that this one's a little more 50-50 than the other aggro decks. Now, one thing that I've fallen into the trap of is trying to Phantom Dive and put 30s onto the Roaring Moons, thinking they're going to have to Frenzied Gouging my Regidrago, but the same as Miraidon, they're trying to knock out our Ogerpons or our Regidrago Vs. So really what we want to do is like set up their Squawkabilly or even possibly their Pecharunt for a Kyurem turn. And if they do have to Frenzied Gouging or through one of our Dragos, then we can bring up their Pecharunt or the Squawk and knock out that and the one that they had to put the 200 damage on. But putting 30s on it doesn't seem to really pay off from my experience. We're also going to want to discard our stadiums over playing it unless they already have a Pokestop in play, then we should replace it. But we don't want to just give them a free stadium to use their 220 attack without putting damage on themselves. And same as the other matchups, we want to get a 1 prizer in the active and on the bench if possible. And we're going to try to fix the prize trade with Radzard if we fall behind. Lugia is another pretty hard matchup, but I do think out of the bad matchups, they are the most likely to dead draw and allow for us to win. It's a pretty dynamic matchup, and unfortunately I haven't played against it as much as I would have liked to. So I'm just going to say what I've noticed from the matchups I have played and what I kind of think in my head. Ideally, we can use Sinnoh twice, once to get around a V-Guard on Lugia so we can Lost Impact it, and once to get around the Legacy Energy. If we can only use it once though, the Legacy Energy is the more important thing to get around. If we find them in a position where they don't have the most amount of energy in play, we could try to focus down the Archeops. And if they're down a bunch of energy, we could attack with Goodra's attack to try to force them to put extra energy into play, and maybe they would end up running out of it, and maybe they would end up running out of energy and we could stick something in the active. Also, just as with most of the other matchups, always be looking out for plays and ways to set up other Pokemon to be knocked out with Kyurem with the Phantom Dive attacks. There are positions you can find yourself in where you can put like 6 on a Lumineon and then knock out maybe the Lugia that you just attacked into and the Lumineon for 4 prizes. Just keep in mind that V-Guard energy still works on the bench to block 30 from Kyurem's attack. From the games that I've played against Gardevoir, it seems pretty favored. Just keep in mind that we shouldn't be using our Kyurem unless it's for game or the V-Star isn't used. We want to save our switch cards for the Monkey-Dory Confusions. But most of the time this matchup, usually what I'll do is Phantom Dive whatever's in the active, put 20 onto the 3 Ralts, and then next turn try and KO 2 Kirlia. Then they're only left with 1 Kirlia to evolve into Guardian. They can't draw a bunch of cards, so then we can just kind of take over the game. Goodra is also a pretty good attacker because it will make it so they can't really one-shot our Drago. Well, that's the video. Hope you all learned something or at least enjoyed it. Regidrago is definitely a fun deck, so go try it out. Like or dislike, comment, and subscribe, and take care and have a good one.